From hobby farmers to weekend gardeners and everyone in between, Tractor Supply trusts 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business to make shopping more personal. Together, we're connecting over 2,200 stores with 5G business internet and powering AI so team members can match shoppers with products faster.
You're all set.
This is enriching customer experience. This is Tractor Supply with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
You go into your shower feeling, but as soon as you reach for the Irish Spring, your day immediately gets better. That crisp, fresh, unmistakable Irish Spring scent zings your brain and awakens your senses. So when you finally emerge from the shower, 37 minutes later, because you pay the water bill so you can stay in there as long as you want, you're ready to take on the day and smell great doing it. Irish Spring Body Wash and Bar Soap. Fresh, green, Irish. Shop now at Walmart.
The NFL Draft is now officially open. This is draft season presented by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at Moody's.com. Hello, everybody. I am John Schmeelk, joined as always by my partner on draft season, Tony Pauline from Sportskeeda, covering the NFL Draft, the young players in the National Football League. A busy show coming your way today. A wild weekend in college football. Tony and I will cover all of that. And then, of course, we're going to continue our look at the NFL rookie class from the 2024 draft. We did offensive players last week. If you haven't checked that out, go check it out. This week, we're going to do defensive players, and we got a lot to cover today, Tony, so let's go right to it. How are you today, my friend?
Okay, a little tired. Watched the Jet debacle I guess it wasn't debacle. It was kind of an interesting game till the end. But, yeah, very, very busy weekend, both in the NFL world and the college football world.
And the Major League Baseball world. I'm sure you watched the Mets yesterday. I will be going to Yankee Stadium on Tuesday night. Yankees trying to go up 2-0 in that series against the Guardians. We'll see how that goes. Well, let's start with college football here, Tony. Alabama, skin of their teeth, man. In a close game. And South Carolina continues to really flash and show that they are a very good team, especially on defense.
But they keep losing close games, which they probably should win. I mean, Alabama, after that win over Georgia, you figured they're on their way. They lose to Vanderbilt. They had to come back against South Carolina. And it's time we start talking about Kyle Kennard. I mean, the pass rusher from the University of South Carolina. He was given free agent to reject grades coming into the season because of his height, size, speed. He goes about 6'2.5", 255 pounds. He's projected to run the 4.9s. He's got linebacker size. He's got defensive end speed, but he's got great production. I mean, 2 sacks and 3 tackles for loss in the game against Alabama. He was omnipresent. He was consistently blowing up their plays. But in 6 games this year, he's got 7.5 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss. He's really put a lot of pressure. He's really impacted games. So Kennard is going to be interesting. Well, Kennard is going to come down to his pre-draft testing. I think he's established himself as a late day 3 pick. How early he goes in day 3 will be determined how fast or how slow he runs during pre-draft testing. Jaden Roberts.
Yeah, Tony, real quick. Tony, real quick on Kennard. I went back, I watched like 5 or 6 of his sacks. I'm surprised that he's a 4.9 guy. Watching him on tape, he looks like he's a better athlete than that. And I think he bends pretty well. Like, he gets underneath some of these offensive tackles. You know, maybe his 40 time's not going to be great. I bet you his 3-cone ends up being pretty strong based on the agility that I saw watching him on tape.
And if the other things fall into place, he's a draftable guy. But remember, he's 6'4", 270 pounds. He's 6'2.5", 255 pounds, which factors in. And you could be right because those times are estimated as of right now. The bottom line is this: he's gone from someone who was graded from a PFA to a street free agent. Now he's a draftable prospect.
How about Jaden Roberts? Go ahead.
Yeah, he is a big, strong, punch in the mouth. Typical type of offensive lineman that we see coming out of Alabama. Great run blocker. Does get exploited sometimes by some of those quick, athletic, agile defensive linemen, which is a problem. You're looking at a power gap blocker somewhere in day 2.
Yeah, and he has struggled in some pass protection this year. If you look at some of the metrics, pressures allowed and stuff like that. Then the Alabama defense. We talked about the change on this show going from the Nick Saban to DeBoer. And I think you're seeing that on defense without Nick Saban there, who really is an excellent defensive coach. And the Alabama defense just has really struggled.
Struggled with a lot of talent. I mean, they got a bunch of guys on that defensive side of the ball. Domani Jackson, who went down with an injury, Devontae Lawson, the inside linebacker, Tim Smith, Malachi Moore. I mean, these are all top 100, top 125 prospects. And they're getting pushed around. They're getting pushed around by a subpar or average South Carolina offense. Vanderbilt had their will with them. So, yeah, it's not just, it's a system that is not exploiting or using talented players who are going to be drafted. One guy, Otis, the defensive lineman, he already left because he wasn't getting playing time. So it's really surprising to see that talented Alabama defense get pushed around the field.
All right, let's go to the Red River rivalry.
Yeah.
Texas and Oklahoma, and Texas rolled Quinn Ewers back in the game from his injury for Texas.
Yeah, it wasn't much of a rivalry on Saturday. It was for the first quarter. And then, I mean, Texas just took the ball and literally ran with it or threw it and utterly destroyed Oklahoma, which I'm sure they're very happy about after last year's loss. For the one good thing about that I saw from Oklahoma is Billy Bowman, the safety, had a big interception in the first quarter, put Oklahoma into scoring position. He goes about 5'10", 190 pounds, but we've seen smaller safeties play productively in the NFL and get selected in the draft rather early. Bowman's like that. He is a tough run defender who also shows excellent ball skills. I like his sideline to sideline range. I liked him coming into the season, and I think he's played well on an Oklahoma team that's had as many downs as they've had ups this year.
What do you think of Quinn Ewers back in the lineup?
Thought he was okay. I want to like Ewers. I think all this talk about him being a top 10 pick is nonsense. To me, he's very indecisive at times. He stares down the target. He's slow to pull the trigger. I think those things are going to really hurt him in the evaluation process, and you're going to hear a lot about that next March and April as we get closer to the draft. If you remember that his true freshman season when he broke in against Alabama, he had that great first half, and then he broke his collarbone. He's been steady, but I just expect more from Quinn Ewers, and I don't seem to be getting it. I don't see great progress in his game.
And then Kelvin Banks, Tony, you look at some of the analytics, according to Pro Football Focus, has allowed just one pressure all season, not one sack, one pressure all season. We've talked about him a lot. Does he continue to impress for you?
He's incredible. I mean, it's not just the pass protection skills. It's the ability to get out on the second level, block in motion, take on linebackers, even defensive backs. It's the agility. Plus, he's got some power to his game. And we talked about Banks last week. I wrote about him at Sportskeeda. A lot of teams already have him on their guard board. He may not measure 6'4" prior to the draft, and he's going to enter the draft. I'm told he's already, and I wrote this article on Sportskeeda, he's already decided on representation. It's going to be an interesting study, because we've seen teams go with quarterbacks that are smaller than usual, the 6-foot guys, 5'11" guys. Would they take a guy like Kelvin Banks if he comes in under 6'4" and just say, hey, listen, we're not going to worry about the height. This guy is a tremendous pass protecting blindside tackle that can also block in motion. We're just going to leave him at left tackle and, until he fails. I mean, there's a guy by the name of Olivier Tucker who plays for the New York Jets right now, who was a phenomenal left tackle at USC, but he's only 6'2.5". When he was forced in the left tackle spot a couple of years ago because Mekhi Becton went down, he actually did a very good job. So Banks going to be an interesting study, as will be another player that we're going to talk about real soon.
Yeah, and Peter Skoronski is another guy I'll compare him to, Tony, right? Who was a really good tackle. He had to move into guard. That was the last couple of drafts. So let's jump ahead to that game.
You got to remember, Skoronski was as much the short arms, the 32-inch arms, 32.5-inch arms. Now, if Kelvin Banks comes in, he's got 32.5-inch arms. He's a guard. But if he comes in and he's got 33.5, 34-inch arms, and he's 6'3.5" or 6'3 3/4.
I would leave him at tackle then for sure.
Yeah. Until he proves I would too, until he proves he can't handle it.
I'm with you. So why don't we jump ahead a couple games here, Tony, and then we'll go back since you're on the offensive line. Ole Miss LSU. Will Campbell. You look at some of the analytics. One pressure in the last 3 weeks. but I know he maybe has not quite met expectations for you that you had preseason heading into 2024.
He just does not look like a top 10, top 15 pick. He looks like he's just out there. Yeah, there are some terrific blocks. He's fundamentally sound. He shows the ability to adjust, but I'm going to be redundant in the sense that I just don't see a nasty attitude from this guy. I just don't see someone who's looking to bury opponents into the ground. Had that play in the first quarter where he got walked back into the pocket. The quarterback Nussmeier threw the ball. It went off his helmet. It turned out to be an interception. And the LSU defense bailed him out. But I just, there's just no wow factor with Will Campbell on a consistent basis. And I think that's going to be a problem. Here, mark my words. When you get into the late part of the draft season, mid to late April, you're going to start to hear the word soft attached to Will Campbell's play. There's no doubt in my mind.
All right, and then one other player from this game you want to talk about is Savion Jones, who's been very, very productive in terms of making plays around the line of scrimmage.
6th-round grades coming into the season. Goes about 6'5", 280 pounds, expected to run in the low 4.9s. Last year, he had 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, all of 2023. 5.5 tackles for loss this year, 4.5 sacks. He's a guy that's getting a lot of pressure. You see a lot of progress in his game. The progress that I'm complaining I don't see in Will Campbell's game, progress I'm complaining I don't see in Quinn Ewers' game, you are definitely seeing it in Savion Jones' game. Great as a potential 6th-rounder. He keeps going like this, he's going to be knocking on the door of the late second day.
Are you a morning person? Or when you roll out of bed, do you literally roll out of bed? Listen, mornings can be hard to handle. From the moment you open your eyes, your responsibilities and to-dos start piling up in your head. But you know what helps? Yep, a shower. But not just any shower, a shower with Irish Spring. Yeah, as soon as you reach for the Irish Spring, your day immediately gets better.
Oh, yeah.
All those to-dos are totally doable. Because that crisp, fresh, unmistakable Irish Spring scent zings your brain and awakens your senses. So when you finally emerge from that glorious shower, 37 minutes later, because let's be honest, you pay the water bill so you can stay in there as long as you want. You're ready to take on the day. And smell great doing it. Irish Spring Body Wash and Bar Soap. Fresh, green, Irish. Look for Irish Spring in the soap aisle at Walmart.
Yeah, and he's one of those, bigger traditional 4.3 ends. You don't get as much anymore, Tony, at 278 pounds and 6'5".
And athletic.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on here as we get towards the end of the college football season. All right, now let's go to Penn State USC, and I still can't quite get used to this explosive Penn State offense, Tony. I feel like I'm in the twilight zone here, but they continue to roll, and Tyler Warren, just a monster game, 17 catches, 224 yards. His second game this year, he's gone for over 100 receiving yards in a game. On the year, 40 catches, 513 yards, 4 touchdowns. And this isn't some 230-pound move tight end. He's 6'6", 261 pounds now. So just really, really impressive.
34 receptions all of last year. Well, 6 games into this season, he's got 40 receptions. I think that Drew Allar is kind of looking at him to his detriment. Warren's been terrific. Catches everything that's thrown to him, makes difficult catches, makes contested throws, makes receptions with defenders draped on his back. I say that Drew Allar is looking at him to his own detriment because if you watch the film, Allar's throwing the ball to Warren when there were receivers open over the middle of the field on slant patterns. And really, I thought that Penn State could have won that game during regulation, but Allar was too fixated on Tyler Warren. Now, getting back to Warren, he's a bigger guy. He's not a faster guy. Reminds me a lot of Drew Sample. If you remember Drew Sample coming out of Washington, I
he's
think
with the Bengals now.
Drafted in the second round, a decent player, ran like in the high 4.7s, low 4.8s. He's that sort of tight end. He's more of a traditional tight end who can also block. He's not as athletic as the guy that the Giants selected in the 3rd round last year, but he's more complete and he's more polished and he's more NFL ready. But I think what will set Warren back is I don't expect fast times from him in the 40 at the combine, which for right or wrong, that's going to hurt his draft stock.
No, tight end is very much a testing position now, Tony. People try to draft athletes and turn them into players, so that's something to keep an eye on. And then you already mentioned Allard, the Penn State quarterback on the year. He's been really good. 70% completions, 1,400 yards, 11 touchdowns. But Miller Moss from USC has done a really nice job since he's gotten his opportunity this year with Caleb Williams going to the NFL. 64% completion, 1,600 passing yards, 11 touchdowns.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you saw on that bowl game last year, the Holiday Bowl, that Lincoln Riley was able to find his replacement for Caleb Williams, and he's done a terrific job. A smaller guy, a sleek guy, doesn't have a great build, but he's very smart. He does a terrific job seeing the field. He's accurate for the most part. He protects the ball. Yeah, I don't think he's going to be an early pick, but he's got to be on people's radar as a draftable prospect because, again, we've seen a lot of progress from his game. You've seen a lot of wow moments, and he makes great use of the talent around him.
Yeah, he'll be one of those guys that'll be in one of the all-star games, whether it's the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Game, and we'll see what he can do in one of those venues this year. Let's go to Ohio State, Oregon, Tony. This was the game of the week. I watched this game very closely along with the Ole Miss LSU game at night, and really a close game, but Oregon managed to finish things out at the end. Let's start with Oregon. Jordan Birch. Again, people allowed to consider him a first or second round pick. Josh Simmons as well impressed you in this game.
Well, it's not that impressive. This was the matchup that we were looking for that we really didn't get to see because Jordan Birch didn't play because I think he suffered an injury the Thursday in practice before the game. Then Josh Simmons, who I had coming in the season graded as a second round pick, and he's a terrific left tackle. I talked to actually somebody before the game that Friday, and he says he thought that Josh Simmons going the first round. Josh Simmons went down with a seemingly
he got
bad
hurt in the
injury.
second half. Yeah,
I didn't check up on the injury, but he was carted off the field. That kind of changed the dynamic for Ohio State. But that was a really, really big and I thought important matchup between Birch and Simmons that we missed out on. You look at the Ohio State quarterback, Will Howard, 28 of 35 for 326 yards. I mean, he looks like your prototypical pocket passer, but he's very athletic. He's legitimately picks up yardage with his legs. And, he has good statistical accuracy. I think my issue with Howard going back to his days at Kansas State is he tends to stare down the primary target. And while he's statistically accurate, if you watch the game.
Yeah, I was going to say ball placement's not great.
Yeah, no. Receivers are adjusting to the ball. He's underthrowing receivers, even though he's got an NFL arm. So there's a lot there to work with. But I think Will Howard's got a ways to go. He's going to be a day 3 pick. He is your developmental prospect, where if he gets good coaching, it's the accuracy. And sometimes that can't be figured out.
Yeah, it stinks we didn't get to see that Birch-Simmons matchup. But hopefully Simmons is not going to be something that keeps him out long-term and affects his draft. A lot of people thought, he's a really good athlete, Tony. We've talked a lot about how some of these offensive tackles are guys that might have to move into guard. Simmons is not one of those guys. He is big. He's an athlete. He's a guy that could have stayed out there, and hopefully he's going to be okay. I have not heard final word on his injury yet either. The two Ohio State running backs.
Let me just jump ahead so we could kind of one goes into the other. He is not a left tackle that may have to move into guard, but Josh Connerly of Oregon may be a college left tackle who goes into guard because of the lack of height. He may not even be 6'3", but like Kelvin Banks, I mean, you watch Josh Connerly, the left tackle of Oregon, and he is nimble, he is agile, he is fluid on his feet. He is a tremendous zone blocker. He is a tremendous pass protector. I think I don't know. I think Ohio State had 1 sack, and it was a linebacker blitz up the middle. He basically handled Sawyer and Tuamatola that game. He's such a good pass protector, and he's a real good athlete on the offensive line. But again, like Kelvin Banks, unlike Simmons, he's not going to be the height that teams usually want in a left tackle. And I think that's going to push him in the guard. Remember, you mentioned last week about all these terrific offensive tackles who are going to project to guard. Talked about Kelvin Banks. I think Connerly of Oregon is another one.
Yeah, I remember watching him in the summer when I was doing my summer scouting. He just doesn't look like a tackle. If I felt like when I was watching Graham Barton last year in the summer, and he just doesn't have like the build of a tackle when you watch him, it reminded me a lot of that in terms of just a feel for him. Let's talk about the running backs here, Tony, because I think Ohio State has two really good players in Travion Henderson. He could have came out last year, went back, and I think he's certainly, mostly because he's healthy, right, is going to improve his draft stock from last year. I like Quinshon Judkins a little bit better than Henderson. I think he's a more consistent back between the tackles and stuff like that. Henderson's more of your big play guy. What did you see from those two guys?
Yeah, if you remember, 30, 40 years ago, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had thunder and lightning in the backfield.
Yeah.
That's what Alabama has. I mean,
Ohio
thunder
State.
would be. Well, sorry.
Ohio State. You said Alabama.
I'm sorry. That's what Ohio State has. Right. Exactly. I mean, the Thunder would be Junkins because of his interior running, and he's also a good pass catcher. The backfield had 2 receptions for 38 yards, some big plays, and I think he's sneaky fast in the sense that he shows a burst through the hole, and he shows the ability to beat opponents, into the open field. He's not a slow guy. He's just not a perimeter runner, which Henderson is. Henderson shows the ability to get outside around the edge, create yardage, make defenders miss, and turn in those big runs.
Yeah, and then you were pretty happy with what you saw from Oregon's running back, Jordan James.
That kid is just so explosive. This is the second week in a row. I actually wrote about him at Sportskeeda the prior game when he just took over the game against Michigan State. 23 attempts, 115 yards, 1 TD. He's quick. He's explosive. He runs through defenders. He runs around defenders. I mean, right now I got a day 2 grade on him. He's very enjoyable to watch. And I think he really helps that Oregon offense, who, while they have decent quarterback play, they can't really rely on the quarterback, but they hand the ball off to Jordan James, and he has done a really good job the past 2 seasons.
Yeah, and look, I think Oregon's wide receivers are interesting too, right? They have the small guy, Tez Johnson, right? I think that's it, right? Do I have that correct? He's only like 160.
Correct. Bo Nix's
he's only
brother.
160 pounds, Tony. He's
Right.
tiny, but he's fast. And then you have Evan Stewart, somebody I know a lot of people loved, and I watched him over the summer too. I was impressed, but he's gotten off to a slow start in 4 of his 6 games. It's 4 of his 6 games this year. Pardon me, 3 catches or fewer. But he blew up in this game. 7 catches, 149 yards, and a touchdown. And frankly, Denzel Burke, I don't think he's played all that well this year. This might have been his worst game of all.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see Evan Stewart live up to expectations. Transferred from Texas A&M. He's only a junior. Did receive day 2 grades from scouts. Except for the Boise State game, he's been pretty quiet. And then, the game against Ohio State was his coming out party for the Oregon fans because he is fast, he is explosive, he is a terrific downfield pass catcher, catches the ball well on crossing patterns as well. The Evan Stewart that we saw Saturday night against Ohio State is what scouts are expecting to see, and if he keeps it up, he's just going to keep rocketing up draft boards as a potential top 40, top 45 selection.
All right, then one of the game, Tony, you wanted to hit, and I love when you go dig deep here and try to find some guys that people haven't heard of. Marshall and Georgia Southern. You want to talk about Mike Green? He's an edge rusher from Marshall. I watched some of his tape this morning because I didn't recognize the name. I'm like, oh, let me take a look so we can have a conversation about him. He's got a little spin move on him. He's got a little swim move. He runs through double teams. He's got a great motor. I see what the appeal is here from this Marshall edge rusher.
Undersized, pass rusher out of the Sun Belt. Can come out of a 3-point stance, can stand over tackle, finished in what was a wild game. I mean, while the LSU, Mississippi, and Ohio State, Oregon game were going on the 2 big networks, Georgia Southern was playing on ESPNU, and it was a wild game. Finished the game with 2 tackles for loss and a sack. He's got 10.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks in 6 games this year. He is a pass rushing terror. He's a very athletic edge rusher who can change direction, get down the line of scrimmage, be used in space to make plays in space. He's explosive. He is a guy to keep an eye on. I talked about him over the summer with somebody, and he just keeps improving. And a lot of people in the scouting community are talking about Green as a potential day 2 pick. So while you're never going to see Marshall on a big network, although they did play Ohio State earlier this year, and he had a good game against Ohio State. If you get the chance, you got to check out the Marshall Thundering Herd edge rusher, Michael Green.
Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risks into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. All right, Tony, let's turn to the NFL here. And we've been talking about how this 2024 rookie class that we covered in such depth last year, how they performed early. And of course, the caveat we should make here, as always, is that do not judge a rookie based on how he plays in his first 5, 6, or 7 games. That's not what you do. It takes these guys sometimes to develop. But it's good to see if what we saw on tape matches some of the stuff that we saw in the college game as we did our draft analysis. And I think Jared Verse is a great place to start. And we knew about his power, his motor, and all that stuff. And that's showing up. 2.5 sacks. The production isn't phenomenal, but solid. But I think he's shown you all the traits for that Rams defense that you wanted to see with him coming out. And, some of the power and stuff has translated to the NFL level, which is always good to see.
He's been a starter since day one. He's been a consistent contributor. He doesn't make mental mistakes. As you said, we know about the athleticism, and he's really made that transition well. They had a good pass rusher there, and the young kid that they selected in the 3rd round from Tennessee 2 years ago. I think he's going to be another. I think Verse will be an excellent bookend for him. High upside. He just keeps getting better, and I don't think the transition to the NFL game was as hard for him as a lot of people thought.
Yeah, and Braden Fisk there as well, his former teammate. So the Rams have a pretty fun group of young defensive linemen in that group to try to disrupt inside. Then you have Tavondre Sweat. I'm happy you included him here, Tony, because there was no denying the talent last year, right? He was 350 pounds. He moved like a guy that was 310 pounds, but at the Senior Bowl, he was more like 390 pounds. And you wondered about the weight. You wondered about the maturity with the off-the-field stuff. But he's been in there for the Titans. He's played 226 snaps this year. For a guy that size in his rookie year, that's pretty good.
You consider what was happening in the weeks leading to the draft. You mentioned the weight at the Senior Bowl. Don't forget he had a DUI, or he was busted with a DUI just weeks before the draft. And then the Titans come and they take him in the 2nd round. You're like, well, this guy's got character issues. Credit to him. He's turned it around. He's been a force. Their other defensive tackle has had issues with injuries. He's taken over when he's had to. I mean, he doesn't look like a rookie on the inside of that defensive line. He's a guy who really has, produced and made his presence felt from the beginning. And credit to Tavondre Sweat. I mean, we knew he had all this talent. There were questions about the character, questions about the work ethic. He's turned it around. Good for him.
And then Braden Fisk, I mentioned earlier, Tony. What have you seen from him?
Well, I mean, you just talk to his teammates. I mean, it's like the little train that could, right? But Brandon Fitz comes out of Western Michigan, 6'1", is he 270 pounds, has a phenomenal year at Florida State, has a great Senior Bowl. The motor just keeps going, and he's productive. He's starting, and you talk to his teammates, and they said this guy's at the facility 5 a.m. in the morning, and he doesn't leave until 7 at night. And he really is. He's really attacking it like it's a profession, and like his teammate Jared Verse, the transition has not been very difficult for Brandon Fisk. And when you think of where he was just a couple of years ago, coming out of Western Michigan, maybe he's a late round pick, a 1-gap 3 technique type of guy. He's totally changed the narrative about himself, and he continues the momentum in the NFL.
Yeah, I talked to him at the Senior Bowl last year, and Tony, and he struck me as a guy that, maybe he wouldn't turn into a star, but he's a guy that he would not let himself fail. His natural enthusiasm and energy and focus, he was not going to let himself fail, and it looks like that's going to be the case. Then you have Baby Bison, Elijah Chapman. I say little guy because he's not very tall, but he is built like a brick house, and he's very strong. Andre Patterson, who's a Giants defensive line coach, he's coached guys going back to John Randall for the Vikings. He's been in the league forever. Called him the strongest guy in the Giants defensive line room. And keep in mind, that's a room with Dexter Lawrence in it. And he's carved out a little role for himself, and he's played well, Tony.
Undrafted free agent. I mean, a guy that was, he was on the scouting radar as an undrafted free agent. Didn't have a great 2023 at SMU. Probably played better in 2022, or at least he was higher rated. But again, you consider where he was coming in as an undrafted free agent, what he's doing for the Giants. Only started 1 game, but he's putting that rotational, using the rotation. As you said, he's carved out a role. I mean, it's a great story by a guy who's becoming a real good football player. You know, everyone talked about the backup quarterback last year, Tommy DeVito. Chapman is going to be in the league for a long time, and he's going to be a productive player for a long time, just as long as whatever team he's on finds a place for him.
Now, Byron Murphy, unfortunately for him, Tony, he was, I think you could argue, the best defensive lineman in the draft. He ended up dropping to Seattle. They were happy to pick him. I believe it was in the late teens, if I remember right. He was like 17 or 16, or something like that.
16, I believe.
Unfortunately, he's been hurt a lot, but when he's been on the field, he's been good.
Just recently broke into the starting lineup, so it's going to be interesting to see, how he does. Like you said, he was injured. He didn't have the biggest body in the world. I remember you mentioning about that, how, he looked like a 285-pound guy, so he's going to take a bit of a beating. But, he seems to have things heading in the right direction, and he's got a lot of talent, and he should do well in that system.
All right, I'm going to throw a couple edge guys at you, Tony. You have Austin Booker listed here. Obviously, he dropped to the third round. The Bears, I think, traded a pick from this year's draft to get back into last year's draft to pick him. Jonah Ellis, who I was a big fan of last year, I had a second-round grade on him. He is 1.5 sacks, and he's been part of that Bronco defense that has played really well. And then two of the early picks at edge, Leitu Latu and Chop Robinson, they're playing a lot. We just haven't seen a ton of production from either of those two guys yet. Latu with just 1 sack. You can take that any way you want.
Yeah, I mean, I know Indianapolis is very happy with Latu. So, I mean, the production may not be there, but they like the presence. They like what he's bringing. Chop Robinson, and I got to take the hit on this. I really haven't seen that much from him, and I was a big Chop Robinson guy, so blame me. But we'll see. We'll see now that Russo, I believe Russo's out for the year, so Chop Robinson's going to have to deliver for Miami.
No question. All right, let's go to the linebacker group here, Tony. You had 3 guys listed. Edgerrin Cooper from the Packers, who has played a lot for them. They've had some injuries at linebacker, so he's had to play a ton. Peyton Wilson for the Steelers, who has stayed healthy for the most part, which is the important thing for him. And then Trevin Wallace from the Panthers is on your list. Talk about those 3.
The thing about Peyton Wilson is we knew if he stayed healthy, he's going to be a real good player because he was a phenomenal player at North Carolina State as long as he was healthy. And he stayed healthy, and he's productive, and he's starting for the Steelers. So, the Steelers, day 2, they get the center, Zach Frazier, and now they got Peyton Wilson. And these guys, especially if Wilson stays healthy, these guys look like keepers moving forward. As far as Wallace is concerned, he's basically doing what he did at Kentucky. He's a real good run defender, real good guy on the inside. He's a pounder. He's a grinder. He's done a good job in a bad situation there in Carolina. Edgerrin Cooper moving into the starting lineup now. Smaller guy, very athletic. The way they use their linebackers, I think it'll be a good fit for Cooper moving forward.
Are you a morning person? Or when you roll out of bed, do you literally roll out of bed? Listen, mornings can be hard to handle. From the moment you open your eyes, your responsibilities and to-dos start piling up in your head. But you know what helps? Yep, a shower. But not just any shower, a shower with Irish Spring. Yeah, as soon as you reach for the Irish Spring, your day immediately gets better.
Oh, yeah.
All those to-dos are totally doable. Because that crisp, fresh, unmistakable Irish Spring scent zings your brain and awakens your senses. So when you finally emerge from that glorious shower, 37 minutes later, because let's be honest, you pay the water bill so you can stay in there as long as you want. You're ready to take on the day. And smell great doing it. Irish Spring Body Wash and Bar Soap. Fresh, green, Irish. Look for Irish Spring in the soap aisle at Walmart.
All right, let's go to the secondary, Tony. A lot of names here, and I'm going to start with Quinyon Mitchell. Because I think he's played pretty darn well for the Eagles. They have a little bit of an older secondary. They did draft 2 guys in the first and second rounds of this year's draft. And I think the early returns from Mitchell, I think they have to be pretty happy with him, especially adjusting from a smaller school and a smaller conference with Toledo. And I think he's adjusted to the NFL game pretty darn well.
He's been phenomenal. And remember, a lot of people thought that Terrion Arnold was the top cornerback in the draft. And
he has struggled, by the way.
Arnold has struggled, and I think Mitchell has played phenomenal. I mean, and again, we talk about Brandon Fitz going from Western Michigan and Florida State to the NFL. Quinyon Mitchell came right out of the MAC, went to the Senior Bowl, knocked it out of the park at the Senior Bowl, and I think We're on the Giants network, but I think Howie Roseman, there was talk he was going to move up to ensure getting Mitchell. He stayed there. Mitchell fell in his laps, and he's been terrific.
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately Giant fans know how good of a job Howie Roseman does. They see the Eagles enough, Tony. Tyke Smith, we saw him for Tampa, Tony. He was one of those bigger corners coming out. He had a nice play in the game against the Saints. I believe he had a forced fumble, right, in that game, if I recall properly. But I think he stepped in there. Tampa's had some injuries at corner as well, and he's had to play.
A real good nickelback. I mean, here's a guy, you look at his career. He was a terrific cornerback at West Virginia, transferred to Georgia, had some injury struggles, really kind of was a nickelback at Georgia. Now he's translated to be a real good nickelback in that defense by Todd Bowles. He's got a lot of upside. We talked about Peyton Wilson. If he can stay healthy, if Tyke Smith can stay healthy, he's a guy with upside. He's a guy that's got polished skills. And I think he's doing well because he's finally being able to stay on the field. If you go back and you watch his early career at West Virginia, we're seeing that Tyke Smith now.
Yeah, and I say bigger guy, not because he's 5'10", but because he's 202 pounds, which for a corner, remember, he played safety a bit at Georgia as well. So he's one of those guys, he kind of plays that, slot safety hybrid role, and he's done a nice job for them. Kamari Lassiter for the Texans, Tony. He's had to step in and play for them right away and play outside on the perimeter. We know about his 40 times last year, but the lack of speed does not seem to have shown up on game tape much.
Instinctive, horrific ball skills, knows what's happening on the field. And you kind of touched on it, the lack of speed. I mean, his pro day numbers was 40. He didn't run at the combine. His pro day numbers were anywhere from the mid 4.5s to the low 4.6s. And there was some concern that he may not, this is a guy that early on people thought could be a first-round pick. After the pro day, they're talking maybe third round. I had heard second round all along. I knew the Texans like him. And, I mean, he's been terrific. I mean, what he does is what Quinton Mitchell does, and what I've talked about a lot of times on his podcast, he does a great job making plays with his back to the ball. He finds the ball in the air. He's instinctive. He tracks the pass in the air. And, if you run a 4-3-2, but you face guard, you're going to get burned time after time. If you're running the low 4.5s, but you can track the ball and you get your head back around, you're going to make plays, and that's what Lassiter's done.
All right, I want to group the two New York Giant players together, Tony. You've been impressed with Tyler Nubin, who's made a lot of really nice plays around the line of scrimmage, very physical. Same for Drew Phillips. Both these guys are just physical players in the perimeter that don't mind helping out in the run, and frankly, both have been very solid against the pass as well.
Yeah, well, Phillips was a good cover corner at Kentucky, and he's a smaller guy, but he plays big football and he plays smart football. Newman, I think, has surprised me with his playing coverage because he seemed more of a downhill safety when he played at Minnesota. Didn't play at the Senior Bowl. There were injury concerns. The Giants rolled the dice on him in the second round. He's played very well, and you take those two guys with Deonte Banks, and they're really developing an excellent young secondary, the Giants.
And let's stay in the division. A couple corners in the division, Tony. Mike Sansner who has now basically had to step in and play outside corner for the Commanders. Everyone just figured, he was a slot guy in Michigan. You figured he'd come in the NFL, play slot in the NFL. But they're so shorthanded outside and, frankly, have not gotten really good play from their outside corners that they're starting him on the perimeter now, and he's stepping up and doing a nice job.
I didn't watch too much of the Ravens game. He had a great game against Cleveland, although the Cleveland offense is struggling. Literally one of my favorite defenders from last year's draft. I mean, a guy who didn't measure as far as the height's concerned. He was under 5'10", but he was smart. He was incredibly athletic. Played well. There was a few bumps in the road for him last year during the national championship run by Michigan. Had just a tremendous pro day. Not only doing defensive back drills, but also ran routes. There was some thought that Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers would take him in the second round. They went with Ladd McConkey. He fell into the Commander's lap. I mean, he's a guy who he doesn't have, he's an Adoree Jackson type in the sense that he doesn't have that classic outside cornerback height, but he's just a tremendous football player. And he's a good athlete as well.
Yeah, and well, let's go to Kalen Carson, right? He's with Dallas. He's had to start at outside cornerback for them with the injury to Deron Bland opposite Trayvon Diggs. Then Carson ends up getting hurt. He's missed the last couple of games, but I think he went in the 5th round, if I'm not mistaken, Tony.
Right.
But one of those physical players. He did have a missed tackle against Baltimore, which turned into a long touchdown down the field. But I think given where he was picked on day 3, Dallas has to be pretty happy with what they got in Carson.
Yes and no. And the reason I say yes and no is coming into the 2023 season, Carson was rated as one of the top cornerbacks from the senior class. He was rated higher than Quinton Mitchell. It's just that he did not perform well in 2023. Seemed very, just seemed to be out there rather than making plays. Really didn't develop his game, which pushed him deeper into the draft than people thought. He's got the size. He's got the speed. He showed the ball skills early in his career at Wake Forest, and he seems to be getting back to that where he was in the 2023 season.
What have you seen from Beanie Bishop with the Steelers that you like, Tony?
I mean, again, a guy who wasn't drafted, a smaller cornerback, but he's feisty, he's tough, he plays bigger than his listed size. And for him to be getting the time that he's getting at nickelback, in that scheme where a lot of them, facing the action, I think it's a terrific story of Beanie Bishop.
Let's go to Javon Bullard with the Packers, and he is a teammate that I want to throw some love to as well. Evan Williams, the 4th-round safety out of Oregon. I think he's played pretty darn well next to Xavier McKinney, but you like what you've seen out of Javon Bullard.
Especially the way the way they use their safeties. And, the Packers like drafting safeties, and to take Bullard where they did, and the fact that he's starting, that he's playing is a terrific story. And he's in the ideal situation. You watch Bullard at Georgia. He was a tough physical guy. He went for the knockout blow, but he also had decent ball skills. Didn't have great range, but he's very good between the numbers when the ball's in the air, when he can see the action. And the fact that he's getting the playing time, like a lot of these other defensive backs, we went through it. I kind of stuck some linebackers in there, but this list is full of the first-year defensive backs who are really doing well.
Yeah, they've had to plug right in there. And Nate Wiggins for the Ravens, Tony, I think I was probably a little bit higher on him than you were last year in last year's draft class. And he's really stepped in for Baltimore. And the Ravens, they're a physical team, Tony. They're not going to play somebody if they're not going to play physical football. They've let him play a lot of man-to-man defense. And I haven't noticed a ton of tackling issues. I think you got to be pretty happy on the early returns of Nate Wiggins playing for Baltimore.
The Ravens like to take cornerbacks and receivers in the first round. I mean, that's their MO. And it looks like they've struggled for the most part, except for Zay Flowers at the receiver position. They've hit some home runs at the cornerback position, and it looks like Wiggins is going to be a home run at the cornerback position. I was a little bit down on him compared to you because I thought he did a lot of face guarding, but he hasn't given up a lot of big plays, and he's done. You mentioned the tackling. I think his cover skills have been real good this year.
All right. I want to mention Jarvis Brownlee, a defensive back for the Titans. I think he's played pretty well. He was kind of a guy you thought would play a lot in the slot. I think he's done okay for them. And then a couple, I think both these guys are safeties, right, Tony? I know Cameron Kitchens. What do you think of his play so far? And then a player I am honestly not familiar with, Storm Duck for the Miami Dolphins.
Let's go with Kitchens. I mean, Kitchens is a guy who was a real good player, but he ran the 4.6s, 4.5s and lead up to the draft. We saw him at the Senior Bowl. He's got real good ball skills. He can play over the slot receiver, and I think he's done a good job at that. Storm Duck has been moved in and out. He's seen some playing time. It's a good story with Storm Duck. He was a terrific cornerback at North Carolina up until 2022, highly rated, transferred to Louisville, kind of fell off the map at Louisville, wasn't drafted, signed as an undrafted free agent by the Dolphins, and the fact that he's getting time at both outside corner and nickelback, and he's been relatively productive when he's placed on the field, hasn't embarrassed himself for a guy who's watched his stock go up and down like a roller coaster, and to sign on as a undrafted free agent and start playing the way he was playing during his North Carolina days is a terrific story.
All right, Tony, real quick before we say goodbye, monster game Saturday night, Georgia and Texas. Texas will get a shot against one of the better teams in the country. Georgia will have a chance to, I guess, redeem themselves as a little bit strong, but come back and try to win one of these big primetime games against another, so weird saying it, SEC school in Texas with so much good offensive personnel. That's going to be a fun game. You could talk about that one or anything else that you're keeping an eye on this weekend.
Well, Mikael Williams, the defensive end from Georgia, who's had some injury issues, has been, there's a lot of opinion on him. Some people have him as a first-round pick. I have him as a day 2 selection. He's an athletic guy. We've talked about Kelvin Banks consistently on this podcast. Talked about him 30 minutes ago. That is going to be a great matchup to watch. If Mikael Williams is on the field and he's relatively healthy, going up against Kelvin Banks, that is a big-time heavyweight matchup that scouts will point to in the draft process as you get closer to the 2025 event.
And by the way, I got a double confirmation. The Boise State running back, by the way, continues to just be unbelievable. Yeah. I wonder if he's going to figure out a way to get into the top 10 this year, given the way the draft class looks overall. Still might be a little tough for a running back, but boy, he certainly is a good enough player to do it. And I believe it is Ashton Genty. So I believe you had that correct, Tony, when you had that a couple weeks ago. So
there you go. Remember a couple weeks, I said he was the front runner for the Heisman. I think right now he's definitely the front runner for the Heisman.
Dude, the way he breaks tackles around, he looks like Barry Sanders. It's ridiculous.
And their passing game, it's not like they got to spread the defensive backs out because Boise State's going to beat you with the passing game. They can just load guys in the box, and he still finds way. And remember, I mean, he did it against Oregon too. And we talked about Judkins and Tyrone Henderson. I mean, they were good against the Oregon defense, which Ashton Genty just shredded earlier in the year.
He's shredding everybody, quite frankly. I think he might. I got to double check it. I think he's close to 1,000. He might be over 1,000 yards already. That's how good he's been early this year. He's just been phenomenal playing college football, man. So keep an eye on him. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at Moody's.com. Draft season is presented by Moody's. I am John Schmeelk for Tony Pauline from Sportskeeda. Any parting comments here, Tony? Or you're good?
No, I was just looking. Ashton Genty, over 1,000 yards, 1,248 yards with 17 touchdowns, only 9 receptions.
How many yards per carry is he at, Tony? Like 9?
9.9. He's only had 9 receptions. He only had 9 receptions this year, but last year he did have 43, and he's a good pass catcher in the backfield. When you watch the film, he's only had 1 game under 150 yards this year. That was Portland State, and they won 56-14. So I'm sure they didn't even play him in the second half. 11 carries, 127 yards, 11.5 yards per carry. I talked about the Oregon game. 25 carries, 192 yards, 3 TDs.
Yeah, certainly better running back class this year led by Genty. So it'll be fun to see exactly how that goes. Tony, we'll talk to you next week, my friend.
Absolutely.
For Tony Pauline, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time on Draft Season, everybody.
What's up, everybody? This is Peter Schrager from Good Morning Football and The Season with Peter Schrager. And guess what? It's football season. And you can now get almost anything you need for game day delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, can't get a running back delivered, but you can get baby back ribs delivered. Strong defense? Like, no. But a strong deodorant? Yes. A 6-pack of abs? That's absolutely not. No. But a 6-pack of beer? Uber Eats can get you that. There you have it. Get almost anything for game day delivered with Uber Eats. It's the official on-demand delivery partner for the NFL. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See that app for details.
You go into your shower feeling, but as soon as you reach for the Irish Spring, your day immediately gets better. That crisp, fresh, unmistakable Irish Spring scent zings your brain and awakens your senses. So when you finally emerge from the shower, 37 minutes later, because you pay the water bill so you can stay in there as long as you want, you're ready to take on the day. And smell great doing it. Irish Spring Body Wash and Bar Soap. Fresh, green, Irish. Shop now at Walmart.